Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Anurekha Charipak, Assistant Professor, Department of Sociology, Savitribai Phule, Pune University. I am coordinating the paper on sociology in India. Today we are going to discuss the debate on caste. This module has been written by Anandita Chakravarti, Research Scholar, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. In this module, we discuss caste as a social structure within India. We discuss it as a tradition, especially its relationship with power, and also as caste being theorized as humiliation. We also discuss the reservation debate, which is a highly contested and important issue with regard to social justice in India. Further, we will also discuss the interlinkages of caste with class, caste with politics and gender, and also caste with the state. Introduction. This module seeks to analyze caste as a structure of social hierarchy. In doing so, it analyzes caste from three perspectives, namely tradition, power, and humiliation. The module situates the debate on caste within the larger issues on justice and equality, linking it with the institutionalization of justice in the form of affirmative action. In throwing light on the contemporary scenario of caste, the module attempts to bring out the complexity that exists and emanate when caste is studied in the context of class, politics, state and law, and gender. A brief overview. The Indian caste system is historically one of the main dimensions where people in India are socially differentiated through class, religion, region, tribe, gender and language. The Oxford Dictionary of Sociology explains caste as an institution of considerable internal complexity which has been oversimplified by those seeking an ideal type of rigid hierarchical social stratification based on extreme closure criteria. In Max Weber's writings, it was synonymous with ethnic status stratification and constituted one end of the continuum which contrasted status honor stratification with commercial classes and market. Possibly the clearest definition is that proffered by Andre Bete, who describes caste as a small and named group of persons characterized by endogamy, hereditary membership, and a specific style of life which sometimes includes the pursuit by tradition of a particular occupation and is usually associated with a more or less distinct ritual status in a hierarchical system based on a concept of purity and pollution. Caste is important in the lives of the Indian Hindus, for whom it is the basis of the traditional idea of the four varnas, the Brahman, the Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, and the untouchable or Atishudra castes which fall outside the Varna system. Within each Varna, there are numerous jatis which are small endogamous groups tied to a defining occupation based in a village or a group of village which provide for the element of mobility within the system where otherwise birth determines social rank. The Varna system provides a system of values and jati is functional organization is functional organization and practice. Jatis may seek promotion within the caste hierarchy by adopting the practices of higher Varna which can result in promotion within the Varna but not between Varna, a process known as Sanskritization. It is believed that mobility between Varna can be achieved only through rebirth, where the successful practice of a caste code or dharma earns for the individual an increased karma and therefore higher status at rebirth. The major dividing line between and within caste centers around rules of purity and pollution. These affect commensality, that is sharing and preparing of food, intermarriage and any form of social interaction. Since meat is considered as polluted, Brahmins tend towards vegetarianism and also refrain from alcohol. For this reason too, meat consumption is degraded with distinctions being made between mutton, pork and beef. Spatial segregation is a natural consequence of the jati system. The segmentation inherent in the system and its attendant rules are overseen by a caste code. The caste system has been able to assimilate non-caste, non-Hindu outsiders very successfully. Since independence, the Indian state has attempted to break down caste divisions and to improve the positions of the Atishudra caste, now called Dalit caste. In practice, caste retains an important role in the social structure of India and Indian overseas communities. Some sociologists have attempted controversially to extend the term beyond the Indian situation and to apply it even to the analysis of South African system of apartheid and even to the system of racial segregation in some parts of the United States during the 20th century. A good general account can be found in Chris Magee, Natural Hierarchies, the Historical Sociology of Race and Caste. Caste mobility within caste hierarchy occurs through a number of processes which have been identified by a number of sociologists, namely G.S. Gure, Louis Dumont, M.N. Srinivas, S.C. Dubey, Malcolm Marriott, Yoginder Singh, Iravati Karve, N.K. Bose, Surajit Sinha, B.R. Ambedkar, Andre Bete, Dipankar Gupta. A careful analysis of the theorization would allow us to categorize their views into three broad pathways: caste as tradition, caste as power, and caste as humiliation. The history of modern day theorization of the caste begins with Western and colonial encounters with the Indian civilization. The term caste was the English translation of the Spanish Spanish word casta, first used in the Indian context by the Portuguese seafarers. Though other Europeans were also attracted by India for various other reasons, the British proved to be the most significant among them, not only because of their success as colonizers but also as they produced considerable amount of literature on the social and cultural life of the Indian people. The Western view of caste developed over time with the writings of the Orientalist missionaries and colonial administrators, contributing in different ways. The Orientalists believed that the best way to make sense of Indian society was by reading the classical text of Hinduism. The colonial view attempted to theorize caste as a specific system of social relations. Some Indian scholars who also wrote in similar veins, such as G.S. Ghure, who identifies 6 core features of the Indian caste system, namely segmental division, hierarchy, pollution and purity, civil and religious disability, and privileges of different sections, lack of choice of occupation, and restrictions on marriage. It is in the writing of a French scholar, Bougul, that we see the beginning of a systematic theory of caste system which derives the substance of its argument from the colonial and Orientalist writing. According to him, caste was indeed a system of inequality. Though in its purest form it developed among the Hindus, it was not particular to India. He identified 3 core elements that comprise caste, namely hereditary specialization, hierarchy and repulsion. Louis Dumont, on the other hand, was primarily concerned with the ideology of the caste system. His caste analysis lay emphasis on attributes of caste, which is why he is put in the category of those following an attributional approach to the study of caste system. For him, caste is a set of relationship of economic, political and kinship system sustained by a certain values which are mostly religious by nature. Dumont propounds that caste is not a form of stratification but a special form of inequality whose essence has to be deciphered by the sociologist. Here Dumont identifies hierarchy as an essential value of underlying caste system supported by Hinduism. He begins with Bougul's definition of caste and says that it divides the whole society into larger numbers of hereditary groups distinguished from one another and connected together by 3 characteristics. Firstly, separation on the basis of rules of the caste in matters of marriage and contact, whether direct or indirect, such as food. Secondly, interdependence of work or the division of labor, each group having, in theory or by tradition, a profession from which the members can depart only within a certain limit. Thirdly, graduation of status or hierarchy, which ranks a group as relatively superior or inferior to one another. Dumont views that this definition indicates the main apparent characteristics of the caste system. He describes 3 aspects. Firstly, India is composed of many small territories and castes. Secondly, every caste is limited to a particular and definite geographic area. And thirdly, marrying outside one's own caste is not possible in the caste system. The Hindu mind was concerned with maintaining social difference and inequalities as in Homo hierarchicus. As a counterpart to the book view of Indian society, social scientists, particularly anthropologists, as they began to work on the caste system within the Indian society during the middle of the 20th century, recognized the need for constructing a field-based or a field view of traditional Indian social order. William Weiser, in the Hindu Jajmani system, conceptualized a social relationship among caste groups in the Indian village in the framework of reciprocity. As Weiser explained, each serves the other, each in turn is a master, each in turn is servant. Mutual rank was uncertain and arguable. By implication, mobility was possible in caste. Srinivas developed the concept of Sanskritization to show that the system of caste hierarchies was, after all, not so rigid and closed as it appears from the book view. Similarly, when Dubé identified 5 factors that contributed to a status differentiation in the village community of Shamirpet, along with caste and religion, he also counted land ownership, wealth, position in government service, village organization and distinctive personality traits. Caste as power. The recent as well as not so recent social scientific research on the subject and popular social movements around caste have frequently questioned the validity of understanding caste from the ideological and structural functionalist perspective. The most commonly involved categories in relation to the caste in popular and academic discourses are those of power and politics, theorizing caste as power. The classical Orientalist writings, including the Dumontian version, provide a larger framework for understanding the Indian Hindu society and its difference from modern societies of the West. The supremacy of religious principles, articulated in the form of oppositional unity of purity and pollution, as in Dumont, also meant that in India the secular domain of power was independent of religious domain or inferior to it. This is how Dumont establishes the supremacy of Brahmin in Indian society. A range of scholars have questioned this formulation on various grounds, some of whom have also tried to construct alternative theories. Let us briefly discuss the works of Nicholas Dirks and Raheja. Based on his extensive historical work on caste practices, villages and ethnographic studies of Kalas in Tamil Nadu, Dirks offers a critique of Dumo and an alternative conceptualization of caste in his book Castes of Mind. Dirks convincingly shows how the colonial rulers, through a process of enumeration and ethnographic surveys, raised consciousness about caste. They also produced social and intellectual conditions where caste became the single term capable of expressing, organizing, and above all, synthesizing India's diverse forms of social identity, community, and organization. The original caste, as he argues, was a diverse reality and did not follow from any single principle as suggested by Dumo. He questions Dumo's central assumption about the separation of religious authority and political power in the Indian Hindu society. While Dumo recognizes that the king is all powerful in the secular domain, his power was inferior to the religious authority of the Brahmin, articulated in terms of opposition of purity and impurity. This, Dirks argues, was not so case in Tamil Nadu. There was no fundamental ontological separation of the religious from a political domain. Religious institutions and domain of power, especially that of the king, was completely meshed with each other. The king drew his power from religious worship. For the status or religion to encompass power, they need to be separate realities. This, Dirks argues, was not the case in reality. Burkhardt also put forth a similar argument based on a study of Hindu kingdom of Nepal. Not only where there were no doubts about the supremacy of the king in the Hindu kingdom, but the Brahmin, which had been incorporated into civic administration, which effectively made the Brahmin a servant of the kingdom. The king was not merely a political head, but we also deified the kingship. While Dirks and Burkhardt focused on macro structures of power and kingship to show that divinity and power were not two separate spheres in the so-called traditional Indian society, Raheja studied in a micro setting in North India and found the Brahmin-centric notion of caste as being completely misleading. Though caste divisions existed in the region, she questioned the assumption that there was one single underlying value system or ideology that shaped caste relations everywhere. On the contrary, there are several contextually shifting ideologies of intercaste relationships apparent in everyday village social life. Meanings and values are foregrounded differently from context to context, and they implicate various configurations of caste. Instead of looking at caste from the perspective of a hierarchy, she tried to understand the relationship to the categories of centrality and mutuality. Caste as humiliation. Viewed from the below, the most adverse feature of caste is the experience of untouchability. The line of pollution which has demarcated the untouchables from the rest has been a critical point of distinction. In sense, the idea of untouchability is an obvious extension of the idea of pollution or that of the notion of purity and impurity. However, untouchability is also much more than what the notion of pollution suggests. Nowhere in the line of hierarchy is the rigidity of caste as sharp as it is in the line of pollution. The idea of the line of pollution has also been an important category in the official discourse on caste, as in the most of the cases it was used as a boundary line for identifying the scheduled caste and institutionalizing policies of affirmative action for their welfare. Perhaps the far most reaching implication of the growing use of the categories of different classes, the untouchables or untouchability during the earlier years of 20th century was its official recognition in the Government of India Act of 1935. The invention of scheduled caste as an officially recognized category for listing deprived communities was also closely tied to the idea of untouchability. Considering the contemporary situation of Dalits, Gopal Guru cites the implication in the field of theoretical enterprise, and he feels that moving away from the empirical to the theoretical mode has become a social necessity for the Dalit tribals OBC for many reasons. The reasons he cites are: first, they need theory to confront the reverse Orientalism that treats Dalit tribals OBCs as inferior empirical selves and the twice born as a superior theoretical self. The descriptive mode is often deployed by the twice born in order to gift wrap the insult and derision that is inflicted on the Dalit. Thus, description of body language of the Dalits and OBC becomes an erotic need for the cultural and political satisfaction of the twice born. It is due to this reason that the twice born did not find it necessary to offer the theoretical treatment to the theatrical language of an OBC or a Dalit chief minister from Bihar or Uttar Pradesh. The theory of theatrical language offers a unique opportunity for Dalit Bahujan scholars to find this derisive description of cultural symbols. The asymmetrical relationship that characterizes reverse Orientalism seeks to caricature Dalits, tribals, OBCs as amusing objects. This kind of social science practice raises the issue of whether or not social sciences in India is reproducing the same tormenting forms of Orientalism against which it had fought in the first instance. In view of complete lack of theoretical interventions from Dalit Bahujan scholars, some non-Dalit messiahs have offered to represent Dalit Bahujans theoretically. Secondly, it is argued by the twice born that they need to intervene in the Dalit situation at the theoretical level only to restore the voice and visibility to the Dalits and ultimately advance the Dalit epistemological cause. But this also ends up producing reverse Orientalism in a subtle way. The claim to offer epistemological empowerment to Dalits Dalits involves a charity element which by definition is condescending. This epistemological charity has several implications for Dalits. Speaking for Dalits or anybody who constitutes a Jajmani relationship invokes the patron and the client. The patron or the Mukh Nayak in an ironical sense tends to reproduce the Brahmanical mechanism of the first controlling knowledge resources and then producing them into the empty cup palms of the Dalit. This structured relationship produces legitimacy for the patron's clients in both the Dalit soul and the Dalit society. As a result, the patron does not find it necessary to exist from the epistemological fields that are specific to the Dalit and Bahujan situation. This Jajmani system also tends to undervalue or underplay the discursive capacity of such groups who in a more favorable hermeneutic conditions could develop their own epistemic stamina. The postmodernist construction of the Dalits remain blind to the hegemonic politics that suppresses the need to make connections between several local experiences that belong to the same logical class of collective suffering and exploitation. Finally, the discovery of Dalit epistemological standpoint fails to explain who has arrived, whether the object Dalit or the subject Mukh Nayaks. This question becomes absolutely crucial because such claims have been sustained on the basis of throwing up completely new conceptual landscapes from Dalit experience. Inability to either recover or throw up an alternative concept happens because these scholars choose to theorize Dalit experience standing outside the Dalit experience. The representation thus remains epistemologically posterior. Its standpoint remains a mere assertion which feeds on the critique of the mainstream Marxist or feminist framework. This externality hardly enables Dalits to secure theoretical advance for their own revolutionary understanding. The pertinent issue that emanates from the above discussion is the issue of reservation, often termed as affirmative action, and the interesting responses that emerge in the form of debates. Broadly speaking, affirmative action consists of a set of anti-discrimination measures intended to provide access to the preferred positions in a society for members of the group that would otherwise be excluded or underrepresented, argues Deshpande. Many of the contributions to the recent debate do take up political dimensions of the situation by highlighting instances of discrimination based upon caste prejudices. This is a valuable contribution which demonstrates the reality of discrimination and marginalization with the aid of statistical data and recourse to establish criteria for backwardness and deprivation such as region, gender, caste in combination. But this analysis is usually aborted and directed towards policy of defining its goal as that of demonstrating that something is the case. At this juncture, one may question about whom to demonstrate. Since the state has already declared that the other backward classes, OBC, will be introduced in educational institutions, it would appear that only the opponents of reservation are in need of being so convinced. Thus, in a particular twist, the policy recommendations seem to be addressed not to the state, which seems to be already responding to these realities, but to the phantom majority whom the self-styled Youth for Equality and other claims to represent. Or to put it differently, even though there is an ample evidence that the state's character has undergone significant change since the foundation of the Republic, it is still addressed in its earlier essentially managerial form, the one that is meant to speak when people speak of the idea of India. Invariably, we note that the evidence of discrimination is usually channeled into an argument about deprivation. Social divisions with structural consequences are translated into the language of common measure of access to public goods, thus in a way disorienting the political analysis. The shift from discrimination which points to social divisions with structural consequences to deprivation, a lack that may be compensated, is symptomatic of the policy approach which does not examine the social divisions or inquire into the consequences for an understanding of Indian society or democracy. It attempts to find a solution to a crisis. The fundamental question is, how do the state and the advisors perceive this crisis generated by the struggle for the reservations, and by contrast how it might be perceived from the point of view of democracy to come. A foundational necessity. The reservations for SCs and SCs were a foundational necessity for the Republic to come to a being. In civil society discourse, this was usually and still is considered a full and final settlement of the historical debt, after which caste would cease to be a political issue. Caste violence and other evidence of continuing caste discrimination and oppression thus came out to be seen as a social rather than a political problem. On the other hand, the state maintained a predominantly non-interventionist stance in relation to communal relations, reminiscent of the colonial stance. It managed to sustain for some time the illusion of a modern polity moving steadily towards early decades and their intelligentsia, and that they were authorized by a social contract which was not shared by a majority of the population. The country witnessed a return of the unresolved political questions of separate electorates, or rather the unresolved political questions of which the separate electorates' demand was a symptom, seemed to have formed a new way of re-entering the political agenda. The caste groups began to mobilize with renewed energy, though not exclusively within the framework of parliamentary democratic system. The politics named caste as a principal axis for the distribution of status, wealth and knowledge. Movements like Dalit Panthers and Dalit Sangharsh Samiti of the 1970s and later many political parties called for a sharing of power which they regard as having been on a caste basis. The idea of Bahujan Samaj is new and poses those who have been excluded or expropriated as the actual majority. The success of these newly emerging movements and political parties show that the assumption of a unified homogeneous policy was ill-founded. There was no singular political subject. The task of forging such a new community remains a task for the future. Assessment. Ashwini Deshpande enumerates the following points with regard to the assessment of affirmative action. Firstly, it reveals that the presence of discrimination labor markets do not function efficiently. Indeed, there are strong discriminatory losses in earnings among the subaltern groups. Secondly, where nowhere in the world has affirmative action proven to be sufficient to close the gaps between the privileged and the oppressed groups, and there is enough evidence to suggest that the gaps would be larger in its absence. Deshpande and Yadav state that though reservations have been an important issue, the social scientists have not embarked upon a rigorous empirical assessment of its impact. All the standard anti-affirmative action arguments are different for different caste groups, SC and ST. Now there is considerable overlap in these two sets of argument. The difference in argument is based on the difference of the assessment about the nature and extent of deprivation and marginalization of the two groups. The case SC-ST reservation is stronger than that for the OBCs. Planter had undertaken a rough but comprehensive assessment of the affirmative action program. The main conclusions are: firstly, the program has shown substantial redistributive effect. Thus, one can observe that access to education and job is spread wider in the caste spectrum than earlier. Although redistribution is not spread evenly throughout the beneficiary group, the phenomena of clustering reflect structural factors. It has been seen that better situated enjoy a disproportionate share of the benefits in any government program, not just the affirmative action program. Secondly, in the short run, beneficiaries might be singled out and experience social rejection in offices, schools, colleges, hostels and other setups where they are introduced through the affirmative action. However, in the long run, education and jobs weaken the stigmatizing association of Dalits with ignorance and competence. However, resentment of preferences may magnify hostility to these groups, but rejection of them exists independently of affirmative action programs. A major challenge is that affirmative action has kept the beneficiary groups and the problems visible to the educated public, but it has not motivated widespread concern for their inclusion beyond what is mandated by government policy. Interlinkages between concepts. Caste may be understood in terms of the intersections between concepts such as class, politics, law and state and gender. Caste and class. The relationship of caste to class is one of the oldest questions in Indian social science and defining question of Nehruvian India in particular. Major Indian scholars are concerned with this question. However, its very preeminence and the manner in which it was posed have made it an oddly disabling question, argues Deshpande. He argues that in the era of decolonization, enormous hope was invested in economic development as a solution to all manner of social and historical problems. Thus, poverty and underdevelopment seem explainable and therefore transformable in ways that caste or religious divisions are not. In this context, caste came to be considered the legitimate axis of stratification and the social sciences, and questions about economic dimensions of caste were reduced to the teleological expectation that it would be transformed into class. Such a perspective narrowed the focus of attention to economic deprivation and did not focus on alternative descriptions of what was being experienced by the Dalits. The dominant understanding refers to implicit expectation that caste would lose its effectivity when linked with class. Caste and politics. Class is expected to extinguish caste. Electoral politics is seen as igniting it, and there is a constant incitement to think in politics, the very synergy that is rendered unthinkable in economy. But in closer examination, these contrasts are revealed to be misleading because electoral politics in India was itself placed within a larger frame of incongruity. The standpoint for this larger frame was that of a normative Western modernity, from whose perspective democratic elections in traditional society like India seemed out of place. From this vantage point, caste provided a reassuring explanation that relieved the tension of incongruity. This was not modern democracy after all, but a peculiar Oriental variety. This was not simply Western prejudice, because a strong undercurrent of ethical censure palpable in earlier discussions of casteism in politics was produced by internalized norms about an ascriptively unmarked modern liberal individual who votes purely on rational merits. But formal elections were not only the arena of relevance for caste politics interface. In the context of social movements of various kinds, caste and political rationality did not seem to be self-evidently mutually exclusive, argues Deshpande. Deshpande. Caste in relation to law and state. Perhaps the biggest challenge faced by the Indian state has been that of translating into practice its formal commitment to the abolition of caste and caste discrimination, especially untouchability. A disproportionate share of the efforts towards this end has been absorbed by the apparatus of reservations. Within the field of reservations, by far the most troublesome issue, especially in the legal context, has been that of the OBCs. Mark Galanter has explained the legal and constitutional stakes involved in the definition of the OBCs, and since the late 1950s, an unending stream of litigation, particularly in the southern states but also elsewhere, has ensured that the courts have played a significant part in determining the practical impact of reservation. A noted scholar, K. Balagopal, critiques the Supreme Court's verdict upholding the indivisibility of the SC quota and lays down the bare logic or lack of thereof in the arguments made and the ironic replication of the very same strategies earlier employed by the upper caste to oppose quotas per se, caste and gender. The caste-gender interface has had a very different location and history when compared to the above interfaces. The critical difference lies in the fact that the gender itself has been eternal. Now, the critical difference lies in the fact that gender has been internal to the social organization of caste itself. As Satish Deshpande asserts, the reproduction of caste is entirely dependent on the rules of endogamy, and that is on the prescriptive and proscriptive restrictions on marriage. When considered in terms of relations between castes close to each other in hierarchical ranking, it is once again rules of marriage, hypogamy and hypergamy, that are decisive. Finally, even in the case of informal and unspoken types of arrangements enabling or preventing sexual access to women for men, it is caste status that is regulative. Despite such deep dependence on control over gender relations, caste has generally been theorized in implicitly male-centric terms, the only exceptions being instances of matrilineal. A further historical text is provided to the story in the modern day era by the prominence of gender issues even in the peripheral ways in caste-related reform movements ranging from Satyashodak in Maharashtra, self-respect in Tamil Nadu, and later efforts by Ambedkar, not to speak of various campaigns in Bengal. This public recognition of gender appears somehow to be largely forgotten in the post-independence period until it was rediscovered after Mandal. Interestingly, one of the interesting anomalies about the Mandal watershed is that it has provoked research on subjects bearing no relationship to immediate events and issues of the controversy. Gender was in retrospect almost absent from this critical event, and yet after Mandal, the intersection of caste and gender has become one of the most exciting research sites in caste studies. Let us briefly throw light upon one of the most thought-provoking arguments of intersectionality theory propounded by Uma Chakravarti. Chakravarti, through a theorization of Brahmanical patriarchy, explains how caste hierarchy and gender hierarchy constitute the organizing principles of the Brahmanical social order and are closely interconnected. As she explores the relationship between caste and gender, she focuses on what is possibly the central factor for the subordination of the upper caste woman, the need for effective sexual control over such a woman to maintain not only patrilineal succession but also caste purity, the institution unique to Hindu society. Thus, breach of gender equality, sometimes even oppression, operates at a number of levels and in a matrix of class, caste, gender, race and other arenas. Thus, all these mark the vertex of class, nationality, religion, caste and gender. Conclusion. As it would appear from the available literature on caste in modern India and the above discussion, by the time India gained independence from the colonial rule, organizationally and ideologically the order of caste had been dented. Abolition of the practice of untouchability and expansion of the quota system by the Indian Constitution further reinforced the point that modern India did not uphold normative order of caste. The state policy of affirmative action, the reservations, was designed to create a level playing field where each caste group could compete on equal footing. This change, however, had its limitations. The anti-caste movements had been mostly urban-centric, with focus on the concerns of the upwardly mobile backwards and Dalits. A large majority of the untouchables, however, live in rural areas and were employed either in the traditional callings of the caste or as agricultural laborers. While the welfare and development programs provided them with new sets of opportunities, only a minuscule proportion of them could avail such benefits. Though the Indian Constitution provided reservation for the SCs and also abolished the practice of untouchability, the mainstream process of development planning was largely caste blind. The development machinery worked with categories like the rich and the poor and peasants, farmers and laborers. During the initial debate, caste was rarely treated as a relevant variable in the visualization, designing or administration of various development schemes and programs. However, the process of development did have immense implications for the prevailing structure of caste relations. In this module, Debate on Caste, we have discussed about how initially sociologists in India theorized on caste based from a structural functionalist perspective. Later on, we understood how it is extremely important to theorize caste in terms of its interrelationship with power and also in terms of understanding it as humiliation. Further, by understanding its linkages with class, with gender, with especially in terms of its untouchability, it becomes very important to understand how caste plays out within the state policies and practices. In all, the attempt was made to bring about a complex understanding of the caste system, which was missing from the basis of structural functional analysis of caste system in India. Thank you.